My friend, Roy Blunt.
Okay, Tara, if you could stay up here just a moment. Just stay up here just a moment, Tara. It was mentioned earlier, but there is everybody here that knows anything about the day knows that the day wouldn't have happened if Tara Sutton hadn't decided the day was going to happen. Financially, Doctor, thank you for your tremendous support of everything that Tara does and has done for so long for our community and for our country, and her tireless time, and somebody mentioned earlier her giving spirit. And I don't know anybody that's more generous of spirit than Tara Sutton. And Tara, we wouldn't be here today, Earl Taylor wouldn't have been here today if you hadn't decided this is something that needed to be done, and there's just a little recognition here coming very bringing in. All you've done today. I had some notes a minute ago, and the more Earl talked, the more I decided I wasn't going to go to the notes, because I thought the notes early might be the only thing that got me stopped, and then I wasn't sure they'd get me stopped either. But Earl, thanks for what you're doing all over America to talk about the Constitution. To talk about the challenges, to talk about the uniqueness of what the founders came up with, and frankly to talk about the challenges that some of the founders in some ways created. You know, the way you amend the Constitution. I know when Earl said, well, what if the Congress didn't want to offer an amendment, George Mason's view, you ought to have a backup. But what nobody said was, well, what if only 300 members in the House, in the 435 member House of Representatives wanted to offer the amendment? You still wouldn't have the amendment, because that's not 2/3. Or what if only 60 of the senators wanted to offer the amendment? You still wouldn't have the amendment, because that's not 2/3. And why is that? Why is that? The founders came up, the founders distrusted government. They had come out of revolution, they had barely survived the Articles of Confederation. Spain and Britain and France, particularly Spain and Britain, were ready for them to divide up, and they were going to gather them up one at a time. Barely survived that, didn't trust government, wanted to make it hard to get anything done. But the one thing the founders may have forgotten about was when anything got done, they made it equally hard to get anything undone. And that's the fight we're in, my friends. As we want to change the country, the very Constitution we love means we've really got to stay focused. And we've got to get way beyond our immediate zone of who we talk to, because eventually it takes more than the people we talk to get this done. Tara's heard me tell the story a couple of times. I led the only fight in 10 years to cut the mandatory spending, the stuff that doesn't even get budgeted anymore, that was started by Lyndon Johnson and Jimmy Carter, and some of it by Franklin Roosevelt, and some of it by presidents on my side as well, but not the little pieces, not the very big pieces. We don't even do that anymore, but the one year we did it, I led the fight. It took 100 days. We voted 3 different times in the House. Only time we ever got the Senate to have the 51 votes it took to even do it as part of a 10-year budget cycle. And for 100 days, every phone you could call me on rang all day, every day. And in 100 days, not one person called and said, thanks for trying to cut these programs. Every single call was, don't cut my program. Earl talked about this shifting balance. One of the scariest things I heard, they talked about the income tax in the last 6 months, was 47% of all households in America don't pay income tax anymore. And we all know what they probably don't care a whole lot about the income tax rate unless and until they figure out that, well, the income tax makes a big difference on whether the guy that does pay income tax helps create the job opportunity or not. But that's a pretty big second leap if you don't think your family's affected by the income tax. But there's something important going on in America. And last year, about a few months before this, I hadn't quite got it yet, because we were fighting things that we thought were bit more extreme than anything that our country had dealt with in a long time. And I thought that was the fight. And then about last July, it occurred to me that the American people were so close to a future that they could touch it, and they were deciding they didn't want that to be their future. They didn't want that to be us. And I remember I'm the first person in my family to ever graduate from college. My first home didn't have running water, it didn't have insulation, it was 100 years old. There was a stove in the middle of one room, and that was our heat, except in the kitchen, and it was heated only by the kitchen stove. But that one stove was right in the middle of the room, so I guess technically we had central heat. It was right there in the middle of the room. And I can remember my mother telling me not to touch the stove. You can too. I see a lot of heads nodding. Actually, my grandchildren, there'd be so many barriers they couldn't even get in the room, let alone near the stove. You know, my mother told me not to touch the stove, and I can remember touching the stove. And I can remember not wanting to touch the stove again. And I think what's happened in America in the last 18 months, America's had a hot stove moment. America's decided we don't want to be just like everybody else in the world. We want to be the United States of America.
Yes.
We don't want our president to be focused on wanting to be a citizen of the world. We want our president to want to be the president of the United States.
Amen. Yes.
We don't want a country where the government is bigger than the people. Even though most countries in the world have decided that's either what they wanted or what they were willing to accept, I think the American people don't want that.
Nope.
We want a country where the people are bigger than the government.
Yeah.
And of all the words in the Constitution, the most important are the first three.
We the people.
We the people, because nobody before had ever suggested in any written document that that was the source of government. You know, the Magna Carta had been something like we the barons of England. And the Articles of Confederation had started something like we the states of the United States. And they almost started the Constitution, as Earl knows, that way, but they decided, no, we're not going to start it that way, because that's not the source. The source is something nobody had ever thought was the source before, we the people. And we want to live in a country where the people are bigger than the government. And Tara gave a phrase I've used a lot the last several months, that Ronald Reagan used, and used well and never said better than when she said it today. Liberty cannot be passed along in the bloodstream. That every generation of Americans has to secure freedom for itself. I think this is the moment for those generations of Americans living today to decide if we're going to extend the lease on freedom for another generation or not. Ronald Reagan didn't say, but could have said, any generation of Americans can lose freedom for a long time. Freedom is easier to hang on to than it is to get back. Freedom is easier to hang on to than it is to get back. And we owe this fight to the future. We owe this fight to our children. We owe this fight to our grandchildren. And this is the moment. You know, 2010 is a lot more important than 2008. 2008 is like a lab experiment, because in the 65 years since World War II, only one time has any political party held the White House more than 2 times straight. Actually, Bill Clinton is the only Democrat elected president twice since Franklin Roosevelt. So that's no surprise. People say, okay, let's try something different. But now we know what the change is. And the change is clearly a country where the government would be bigger than the people. And this is the time we either say that's okay with us, or that's not who we want to be. And I think we're going to say that's not who we want to be.
Yeah.
That's why you're here today. That's why you're here today. That's why the Tea Party movement's so important. You know the best thing about the Tea Party movement? Moms.
Yeah.
Moms care a lot more about lots of things than anybody else, but they mostly care more than anybody else about the future of their children. And that's what this is about, the future of our children. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad all of you took a Saturday when you could have done lots of other things to be here. I'm glad Tara does all the things that she does for our country and our community, but she wanted to make this happen, and she did. So I think my good buddy Mo Bandy was here earlier. If he wasn't, he intended to be. And the song we got to hear, where else but Branson, Missouri would you get to hear a great song like that sung the first time? And particularly, where else would you get to hear the guy I get to introduce, which is a great honor for me. He's been a great friend and a great helper for me for a long time, and an encourager for me for a long time. But every American that's alive today, at some moment in their growing up life, was touched by Andy Williams.
Yeah.
Thank you.